And we are back on the Zero Hour, and looking forward to talking again with Patrick Hruby, who writes for Sports on Earth. He's a former adjunct professor at Georgetown University. He's an award-winning journalist. He contributes to the Atlantic Online. He's a great sports writer, Washingtonian magazine, Political magazine, and elsewhere. I write for elsewhere too. Actually, I haven't seen your byline there. Hey, Patrick, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, listen, you've been doing a lot of great writing about this notion of All Players United, which is a group that's talking about unionizing college athletes. And the response from the NCAA has been, hey, 90% of our revenues, which are huge, go to the student athletes. And you've been doing a lot of great research into this whole story. Why would they want to unionize? Where does that money really go? Is there fuzzy math going on? So, tell us, why would college students, they're supposed to be there for an education, they're scholar athletes, why would they want to unionize?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, if the overall economic structure of college sports is one in which the labor force, the athletes, essentially have no rights. If you look at it from an antitrust perspective, these schools are allowed to collude. They're allowed to tell athletes, we will pay you in the form of a scholarship and nothing more. We will not compete and bid for your services, unlike every other workplace in America. That's like the big picture thing. In terms of what they want, they want rights. They want to have a voice. They want to have a seat at the table. Right now, the schools dictate the terms, and they have to accept it. And if the schools were less greedy, and if they were more willing to give their workforce, some basic rights protections, you wouldn't really start to see this unionization push.
Well, you raised a couple really interesting issues there, starting with the most fundamental economic one, which is also philosophical, which is whether student athletes, as generators of massive amounts of revenue, should be allowed to negotiate for their services, and should economic forces be allowed to come into play, competition and so on, which is interesting because, when you think about it, they always have under the table. There have always been recruiting scandals and this and that. So in effect, the argument might be put that out in the open, make it legitimate and honest, and allow these young people to get the fair market value for their services. But I guess people would say the missing part of that equation is the education part. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say, I would say two things. First of all, go back to your own college experience. Many of your listeners, many people out there, if not most, had some kind of job when they were in college, a part-time job, maybe a full-time job, potentially a campus job. At no point does working and earning money take away from your ability to get education or to get a degree. Those two things are actually separate. You can work in the school cafeteria, and you can still get A's. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things. Only for athletes do we created this weird and unique system where we say, you're an amateur, and God forbid you earn any money from playing your sport, even though there's an enormous market for your sport, even though people wanting to watch your sport generates millions and billions of dollars, and, you are the product. You are the product on the playing field. You're the thing that people want to watch. Nobody is tuning in to March Madness to watch these athletic directors. They're tuning in to watch the guys on the floor. And yet the athletic directors are the ones getting $1 million a year salaries, while the players are limited to the value of scholarships. So it really, education is completely separate. It's completely separate from working. The way that the NCAA has sort of conflated those two things, to me, is one of the great scandals of the last, century.
And now you add to that the fact that some of these schools don't give a decent education to their athletes, but you hear those stories all the time too. It gets even more complex. But thought experiment time, because you think, broadly as well as specifically about sports, which is one of the things I like about your writing. So, let's kind of play out the scenario. Let's say that this cartel, for lack of a better word, NCAA cartel, were broken, and student athletes could negotiate for their ability, based on their ability and so on. What would happen to the wall, such as it is, that exists now, economically between student sports and so-called professional sports?
That's a great question, and I'm glad, by the way, you used the word cartel. This is a fun fact. The NCAA, it's not the right choice of word. It is a cartel, and I'm not saying this myself. One of the NCAA's own economic witnesses, expert witnesses in one of the court cases right now, in his own textbook that is taught in college classes, also refers to the NCAA as a cartel. So I just want to make that clear. In terms of how this would play out, if we got rid of amateurism, if there was some sort of free market, I don't think the changes would be as dramatic as some people think. Number one, the NCAA often says, well, if we have to start paying these revenue-producing athletes, we're not going to be able to afford women's lacrosse and men's wrestling and the non-revenue sports. That's bogus. There's a ton of money in the system. And what happens right now is this money basically goes to bigger athletic director salaries, bigger coaching salaries, which we've all seen, and it goes to building bigger and fancier facilities. There's kind of a gold-plating effect that happens because the money is limited from going to the actual talent. So what you would see is a redistribution of some of that money. I don't think a school would necessarily cut its wrestling team to pay its football players, but they might pay the football coach half of what he's making now because there wouldn't be as much money around to pay him. I don't have a problem with that. I also think the idea that, somehow this would, again, negatively impact education, you make a great point. A lot of these places, when you're talking about the big-time athletes that are in the big-time sports that make the big-time money, they're majoring in eligibility. In fact, all you have to do is look at the testimony in the Northwestern case. And by the way, Northwestern is a great academic school that most of these guys are graduating, but they talk about how they have to change their majors because they can't fit into their football schedule. They talk about how, they're encouraged to do that. And you look at other schools, look at what's happened at North Carolina with the academic scandals there. And you could look at a guy, Shane Battier, an NBA player, played at Duke, very, very smart guy. He majored in religion at Duke, not because he wanted to, but because that was the only major that fit his basketball schedule. These guys are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week at their sports. And like I said, it's work. It's a job. You can call it something else, but if you look at what they're doing, you're just being semantic at that point.
Well, absolutely. And to me, this whole business about coaches and coach reimbursement, every time a coach has a bad season, everybody says, what are we paying millions to that bum for? I even think, this goes to the whole 99%, 1% issue for me. Even I don't mind somebody getting a good income, an excellent income for being great at what they do. But the question is, how much is too much when you're talking about college athletics? I think the coaches who have a good season get overpaid. So I think this is an excellent point. And one of the anecdotes that came out of this whole story that was so striking to me, and as we, in our last couple of minutes, I'd love your comments on it, was the one about the wrestling coach who got an $18,000 bonus because a single wrestler won a match. The kid didn't get anything for winning the match. The coach got $18,000. What does that say about our system?
Well, here's what's even funnier. It wasn't the coach. It was the athletic director at the school. So it was some bureaucrat, a couple levels removed from the coach. It was essentially the guy who hired the coach. I guarantee you that athletic director is not even, he's not going to wrestling practice and teaching the wrestlers how to win. He has nothing to do, basically at all, with the kid who actually won the title, who probably should be the one getting some sort of bonus if there's going to be a bonus. But you know what? That story says everything about what is wrong with this system. And I'm so glad you made the comparison to the 1% and the 99%, because this is the problem with the whole system. It's not a free market, but it's a rigged market. Like I said, it's not that these coaches necessarily make too much or not enough. It's that there's so much money available to them because the labor force has the deck rigged and stacked against them, and they are not allowed to make any of that money. And that does speak to the bigger economic inequalities in this country, where we have an economy that, over 20, 30, 40 years has been rigged so that the rules favor the people at the top and the money flows up to them. It's the exact same thing that's going on in college sports.
And you know what's
are not being shared by the workers.
And you know what's striking about this is that we just did a story right before you came on about how Silicon Valley fixes wages and the
Right.
way labor market. To me, it's the same deal. It's the talent is getting exploited and manipulated, and more power, in my opinion, more power to these students for becoming aware of how they're being treated and organizing and doing something about it. I don't know about you, but I say the kids are all right.
I'm all for it. And by the way, they're not even right now talking about getting money. They just want better like medical care, better health protections, better concussion protections. I mean, it's really quite amazing once you have that power imbalance, what kind of abuses result. And I'm with you. I hope these kids take it all the way, and I hope this changes the landscape of college sports.
Absolutely. You know, you listed, and we'll close with this. You listed the point of last year's protest, showing support for athletes suing the NCAA over its handling of concussions and brain trauma, minimizing brain damage, policies to minimize brain damage, and antitrust lawsuit against the NCAA regarding the use of player likenesses, which we haven't even gotten into. This is a great story, Patrick Hruby. I hope you stay on it and you'll come back and talk to us again.
Will do.
And there and that's what we're up against, and that's what we like to talk about here. Please stick with us. We'll be back talking about how the game works when you're buying $70 steaks for legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. That's an interesting story, too. Please stick with us. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.